I think we'll get started with our last panel of the day. Let me also remind that the second keynote speech will be at 7 o'clock in the evening during the reception. So you're all welcome to attend the keynote speech as well. I was also asked to announce that preparing an evaluation form for the conference. So if you have any comments, suggestions regarding the conference program, please feel free to write those down. You can leave the form back at the registration desk outside of this hall. Thank you. I'll pass it to the panelists.
Okay, welcome to the final panel for the day. We have what I think of as a good kind of summary wrap-up. I will follow the example of the preceding chairs and not make speeches and not make long introductions, but simply be the timing referee. Our session this afternoon is the Arab Spring, Experimenting Democracy and Islam in the Middle East. And we have 4 very interesting presentations. I will remind you again, you have biographical information in the material that you have, and we will start in the order in the program. So we will have László Csicsmann first, and then Seif, and then Mohamed, Elowny, and Kenan, Cetinkaya, in that order, and I turn you over to them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, many thanks for the organizers organizing such a wonderful conference. My presentation deals with moderate Islamist movement and the Arab Spring, engagement with democratic values, and I'm going to compare Egypt and Tunisia if time allows it. Today morning, Professor Voll in his keynote speech mentioned the term transformation several times, and I'm going to speak about the transformation of moderate Islamist movement, what we call as post-Islamism. Much has been written on these terms, so I'm not going to go into details, but just to summarize, borrowing Peter Mandavier's description of post-Islamism, Islamist movements are nationalist in orientation. Following an Islamist path has not any strategic importance, as the international community favors spreading democratic values over religious ideologies. Muslim doesn't vote according to religious beliefs, but rather their political conviction. Political participation of Islamist movement involuntarily helps in the secularization process of their home country. Individualistic religious approaches have taken preference over collective practices. And then I'm going to speak about the role of Islamist movement in the Arab Spring. The popular uprising in the Arab world was initiated by young, frustrated and enlightened groups, and not by the Islamist movement themselves. The youth movement slogans were borrowed from the Western dictionary and not from Islamic sources. Islamists at the very beginning of the protest in Egypt or in Tunisia felt themselves frightened by the regime, which usually accuses Islamists for any political disturbance. However, we cannot speak generally about Middle Eastern experience because you can see on this slide that different Islamist movements found themselves in very different situations before the Arab Spring and after the Arab Spring. For example, in Tunisia, the leader of the Tunisian Ennahda movement, Rashid Ghannouchi, returned from his exile on 30 January 2011, just 2 weeks after the overthrow of the presidency of Zine Abidine Ben Ali. In Libya, which is a very different case, former radicals of the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group have joined the rebel movement's National Transitional Authority. In Syria, which is another example, with a very different reality, the rebels have failed to achieve any durable success against the Assad regime. Members of the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria participated, of course, in the protests, but they hide their political affiliation with the movement. In Egypt and Tunisia, where the former dictators were overthrown by the popular uprising, the moderate Islamist movements established political parties and published their political program. It's important to emphasize that both in Egypt and Tunisia, many parties established in the name of Islam. The old movement split into several new political parties. The old movement usually support only one of these parties aimed at monopolizing the usage of Islamic slogans. However, these new parties are not the only players in the political market. These parties of the old Islamist movement refer themselves as civil parties with an Islamic reference. They refuse to bear the level of Islamists and they form electoral coalitions with secular parties in order to show their commitment to democratic principles. However, many politicians accuse moderate Islamists with using taqiyya, borrowing from the Shia dictionary, hiding their true face, their true goals. According to many analysts, if they came to power, they will change their moderate tone and start to implement the Islamic State. Anti-Islamists argue with the one man, one vote, one time principle, which means that Islamist parties use the democratic process as a tool to hijack the political system. These analyses base their argument on the experience of the existing Islamic states, namely Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the Sudan. These fears have been escalating since the electoral victory of another movement in Tunisia and the electoral victory in Egypt. So the second part, I'm not agree with this taqiyya and one man, one vote, one time principles, so I'm going to speak about Egypt and Tunisia in details. Islamism, democracy in Egypt. On the one hand, at the very beginning of the uprising, the leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood distanced the movement from the mass protest. This is due to the historical experience of the movement with the regime. When any political instability occurred in Egypt, the regime accused the Muslim Brotherhood with undermining the political stability of the country. The regime historically exaggerates the Islamist trait with portraying the Muslim Brotherhood to the outside world as an enemy of a secular democratic Egypt, which was not secular and not democratic. For this reason, the movement was very carefully joining in the first days of the mass protest. The last days of January 2011, many Islamists joined to the protests, organizing a logistical supply at Tahrir Square. According to Sheikh Qaradawi, around 10% of the protesters recruited from various Islamist groups. The Muslim Brotherhood initially boycotted the national consultation convened by the newly appointed Vice President Omar Suleiman. However, a few days later, the movement decided to participate in the consultation, which shows the dissent among the different fractions within the group. Mohamed Badi, the spiritual guide, gave an interview to France 24 on the 31st of January, articulating the main demands of the movement: make an end of the state of emergency, writing a new constitution, formation of a national unity government, and resignation of Hosni Mubarak. These demands are in line with the goals expressed by other secular parties. Mohamed Badi has never called for implementing an Islamic state in contemporary Egypt. Nevertheless, the forced resignation of Hosni Mubarak put the Muslim Brotherhood in an advantageous political position, as this movement is the best organized political movement in Egypt. The movement was in favor of the amendment of the constitution approved by public referenda in March 2011. As the deputy of the Muslim Brotherhood, now is the presidential candidate of the Freedom and Justice Party, Khairat al-Shakir, stated in an interview, the constitutional amendments are the most suitable, not the most ideal solution for this transitional period that cannot drag on for too long. These amendments incorporated the most important political demands of the opposition movement. The strategy of the Muslim Brotherhood was to create a self-image of a constructive but political movement, aiming at not to destroy the political system, but to enforce a gradual political reform. With this strategy, the Muslim Brotherhood has reached out to the Egyptian public. However, various factions within the group expressed their dissatisfaction with the leadership's decision with this middle path. Mohamed announced the establishment of an independent political party called as the Freedom and Justice Party. It was a long-time desire of the pragmatist wing within the movement to form a political party. The Muslim Brotherhood, as part of its strategy, formulated a self-restraint policy, namely the willingness to contest elections, but only for 40–50% of the seats in the parliament. In theory, the party is independent from the mother organization in all spheres. However, with the appointment of the party leadership, it is clear that the most important members of the Muslim Brotherhood were elected for leading positions. Issam al-Arian, the former spokesman of the Muslim Brotherhood, leading member of the pragmatist branch, became the vice chairman of the party. Said al-Khatami has been appointed as the chairman of the party. He is also regarded as a key pragmatist member from the second generation. All of them should lead the Shura Council of the Muslim Brotherhood, showing the commitment of the movement toward the independence of the party. However, it's not independent at all, as Mahmoud Hussein, the Secretary General of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, told that, as said before, the group decided that none of its members can join a party other than the group's party. It means that anybody who wants to join to a different party than the Freedom and Justice Party, first of all, he or she has to quit from the Muslim Brotherhood theoretically. The appointment of the party leaders made the young generation of Ikhwans disappointed. Many in their late 20s and early 30s openly criticized the old guard within the movement, as they felt themselves alienated from their political motivation and values. The young generation of Ikhwans wants a full-fledged democracy in Egypt, a very different vision of what the old generation has in their minds. There is an ongoing split within the Muslim Brotherhood, as the movement has lost its ability to monopolize Islamic politics. The young Muslim brothers have managed to register their separate party at Tayyar al-Nasri, Egyptian current party. The founders of this party want to complete the revolution and create a democratic Egypt. The frustrated youth of the party supports a former member of the Guidance Bureau, Abdel Monaim Abdul Futu, whose membership was suspended from the Muslim Brotherhood after his announcement to run for presidency. Now in Egypt, there are at least 14 Islamist parties with very different political programs. The strict Salafist movement established a Nur party, while the real post-Islamist generation has managed to register Al-Wasat party, which is not new because it started during the 90s, but it was not legalized. Islamic politics in Egypt is very competitive now, and the Freedom and Justice Party has a vision to monopolize that part of the political spectrum, but it is not possible. The political program of the Freedom and Justice Party has moved away from the 2007 political platform of the Muslim Brotherhood, in which certain references were made to a religious council. In this new party program, Islam plays a significant role, especially as the term Shura is widely used. The term democracy simultaneously applies in the text, reaching out to the pragmatist reformers of the party. Quotation, this usage also reflects the party's attempt to balance the discourse of the conservatives with that of the reformers in the Brotherhood, with Shura being favored by the conservatives and democracy appealing to the reformers, noted famous scholar Khalid al-Anami. The party platform breaks with the former standpoints about the role of non-Muslim minority and women in the political sphere. In order to promote democratic image of the party, a Coptic Habib had been chosen as the vice president. It is important to emphasize that Habib is not the only Christian member of the party, as there are more than 100 Coptic founders of the party, as well as more than 1,000 women. Habib has started its collaboration with the Egyptian Islamic movements against the Mubarak regime. Habib stated several times that being a member of an Islamic party is not a contradiction, as Islamic civilization gathers Muslims and Christians. However, the party list formed by the Freedom and Justice Party for the November 2011 parliamentary elections, the upper half of the list was preserved for the former members of parliaments of the Muslim Brotherhood and not for Christians, Coptic Christians. The leaders of the Freedom and Justice Party emphasized that the party is not an Islamist party but a civil party with an Islamic background. They call for the preservation of the secular character of the Egyptian state. However, if we analyze the pre-revolution constitution in Egypt, we realize that it is not secular, as the second article of the constitution states Islam is the religion of the state and the Arabic language is the official language. The principles of Islamic law are the chief source of legislation. For the vast majority of Islamist organizations in Egypt, the second article gives enough opportunity to call for implementing Islamic principles. In this regard, it is not the aim of Islamists to change that part of the constitution, but rather the goal is to preserve that part. I'm going to speak now about Tunisia, which was the first Islamist victory during the Arab Spring. The Islamism in Tunisia shares many similarities with the case of Egypt, but it has some distinctive characteristics as well. We know that the Islamic Tendency movement, which came into existence officially in 1981 under the leadership of Rashid Ghanouchi and Abdel Fattah Mulu, called for an Islamic state in Tunisia. It started moderation, de-radicalization, and in the year 1987 was very important when Tunisia has witnessed a serious political crisis which led to the ousting of President Bourguiba, and the new President Ben Ali used the Islamist movement as a political asset, forcing Habib Bourguiba's resignation, and it was a modus vivendi between the regime and the Islamists. However, after that period, during the 90s, Ben Ali forced Rashid Ghanouchi into exile. After Rashid Ghanouchi took the opportunity to return home after ousting Ben Ali, his historical journey has been compared to the return of Khomeini Ayatollah to Tehran from his exile in Paris. Ghanouchi himself rejected such false comparison, saying that he respects the views of the Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Ghanouchi said in many interviews that he respects the civil state in Tunisia and he has no interest in implementing Sharia and the political system. Shortly after his return, the Ennahda party has legalized by the Tunisian authorities, which opened a new chapter in the history of Islamist movement in Tunisia. Ennahda party itself is an umbrella organization for like-minded moderate Islamists, but it has failed to achieve a single voice, like the case in Egypt. Abdel Fattah Mulu, the person who jointly established the Islamic Tendency movement with Ghanouchi, distanced himself from Ennahda and ran as an independent candidate in the parliamentary elections during the political transition. The political program of the Ennahda party is very similar in many points to the Egyptian Freedom and Justice Party's vision. The party platform stipulates that Tunisia needs a civil democratic state in where the fundamental rights of the citizens have been safeguarded. It seems that accordingly, if you compare the party programs, Ennahda is more liberal than the Freedom and Justice Party, as Islamic terms like Shura not widely used in this document. In Egypt, the party has to reach out the more conservative elements, while in Tunisia, the mainstream of the party is less conservative. However, in Tunisia, as in Egypt, there is a rivalry among different Islamist movements, especially Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is the Salafist branch, also published its political manifesto in 2011, January, which calls for the implementation of Islamic State. This document, however, cannot be regarded as a comprehensive political program, as it fails to address everyday problems like the economy or the structure of the political system. I don't have time to go into details about Hizb ut-Tahrir issues in Tunisia, but there were some attacks on cinemas, especially the Tunisian elite accused Hizb ut-Tahrir of using violence, but Hizb ut-Tahrir officially distanced themselves and reject violence. My conclusion is that Islamist politics is very competitive now. There is no single Islamist voice, and the most important thing is the rivalry among different Islamist groups, split within Islamist group. And in my opinion, it is very misleading to use this dichotomy, Islamist and non-Islamist, because the reality, the political reality, is a little bit different from that, and it's a kind of simplification to use this Islamist, non-Islamist dichotomy. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
What I'm going to do is to try to outline aspects of what I call Islamic theory of revolution and imperialism. And my main argument is that at the center of the ongoing Arab revolts, or Islam is actually at the center of the ongoing Arab revolts, and that's what I'm going to try to show. But basically, we can explain the revolts politically, economically, culturally, socially. We can basically read these revolts in any of these ways. I'm going to focus on one aspect. So this is not an explanation of the Arab revolts as much as it's one of the explanations, or an explanation of one of the factors. The Islamic scene basically is very crowded, very complex, very crowded with movements, very crowded with perspectives, to the extent that we have various discourses that represent opposing trends of Islam. And we can actually see that at the moment that parts of the Islamic movements and Islamic discourses are on the side or at the heart of the revolutionary movement in the Middle East. Others are in the center of the counter-revolutionary forces as well. So Islam plays both roles in this. But what I'm going to do basically is highlight aspects of an Arab Islamic revolutionary theory or theory of revolution and imperialism that has been disseminated through expressions of leaders and Islamic leaders and Islamic scholars throughout the time that accumulated in a way that shaped actually the Arab Islamic culture, particularly in the Middle East, and can be seen at the heart of this revolution. This is just an example of an alternative explanation, an explanation focusing on the destructive role of neoliberal politics in the Middle East. These are the literacy rates in the Middle East, and we can see, I don't have time to go through them, but basically the countries that are witnessing revolutions at this moment have the lowest literacy rate. This is from the page of Egypt's page on the World Bank. One of the interesting things, and that shows the destructive role of neoliberalism in the Middle East, basically, is that literacy rate, essentially the adult total, or the percentage of people aged 15 and above who can actually read, was higher in 2006 than it was in that it was higher in 2004 than it was in 2006. We can basically relate that to the privatization campaign that Mubarak began in 1997, and trace back even that earlier to the adoption of neoliberal politics by Sadat in the early 70s after the death of President Nasser. So this is just to set the scene for my topic and for two short videos that I want to share with you to clarify the idea. This is a quote that I use for the explanation, part of the explanation from Audre Lorde. She says simply that the true focus of revolutionary change is never merely the oppressive situations which we seek to escape, but the peace of the oppressor, which is planted deep within each of us. Essentially, we're talking about the awareness, the constitution of the self, and the constitution of the other, or the constitution, the understanding of the oppressive situation. This is from Tony Kane from Barrow too, that revolution begins with the self. So, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you can actually, I can share it with anybody later. I also use Antonio Gramsci as part of the explanation, particularly the war of positions. What my argument is that certain brand of Islam that I'm going to use, and I distinguish between the various discourses in Islam, basically that some are on the revolution side and some on the counter-revolution side. I use the war of position to show the role played by a specific brand of Islam that I call revolutionary Islam, that began with Jamaluddin Afghani, and now probably the most important representative of this discourse is Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah in Lebanon. So this sets the scene for the videos that I'm going to show. Two of them are in Arabic, but I follow them with translation. There's no audio. This is, I don't know what's wrong with the audio, it's not.
They're using that.
It's not here. Well, this is part of his victory speech in 2000, in May 26, 2000. Essentially, this is one of the most profound events in the modern history of the Middle East. Other than the current revolutions, probably this is the most significant, the second most significant after the ongoing revolts. And essentially, he considers the victory against Israel, or the Lebanese resistance victory, as a new stage in the history of the region. And he calls on all the Arabs and Muslims to overcome their despair and arm themselves with hope, put their weakness aside, and rejuvenate their resolve and willpower. Essentially, that profound event was meant to change the Middle East, and it actually did. This is Malcolm X, another expression, another example. I'm not sure why this will be. Is there a tech specialist here?
I'm going to take care of it. Yeah.
Can you do that now?
Yeah.
Okay, Malcolm X talks Los Angeles, May 5, 1962, talks about who taught you to hate yourself. Essentially talking about criticizing the images people hold for themselves. Images people hold for themselves and calling them to change and participated in disseminating a new image of the black person, or a new image of the person, targeting the image they hold, criticizing it, deconstructing it, and then replace it with an alternative one. But the most profound statement, I think, that was made, that's my view on this, that was made in you're gonna do that? Can you stop the watch?
Can I stop my watch? Yeah, I can stop my watch. But they'll just get to supper later.
Do you want me to try that? I mean, Nasrallah without audio is not totally important. Okay. It was working.
Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach to get like the white one? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the sole of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to? So much so that you don't want to be around each other. No, before you come asking Mr. Mohamed does he teach hate, you should ask yourself who taught you to hate being what God made you.
This leads me to the core idea, because he's borrowing from the Quran 29:41 that says the frailest of all houses is the house of the spider, and he's comparing that to Israel. And he could have easily used Mao Zedong's term that Israel is a paper tiger or imperialism is a paper tiger, but he used a Quranic phrase to show the revolutionary potential of both Arab culture and the Quran. And so there is no need actually to quote Mao Zedong on this. You can actually, he was using something from the Arab culture, something from the core of Arab culture, which is essentially the Quran. It all began with Jamaluddin Afghani, and of course later Mohamed Abdul. So this is the trend of this. And it's what is really interesting, it's interdenominational and it includes all sects, Sunni and Shia. So this polarity and division that we get out of using the modern sociological construct of religion and the modern sociological implication of this construct of understanding Islam and dividing Muslims into Sunni and Shia actually fails to explain this long history of interdenominational exchange and intersectarian exchange. Afghani and Mohamed Abdul are Sunni, but then later we'll see that their influence on Hassan Nasrallah and Imam Khomeini, very powerful influence, and they don't think of it in terms of being Shia and Sunni. But this is how Mohamed Abdul relates his first meeting with Afghani and Al-Azhar when he was teaching there. And essentially that he simply says that they were shocked as students by his interpretations of the Quran. And then when Mohamed Abdul himself became a teacher at Al-Azhar, he started teaching a book called the Commentary of Taftazani on the Creed of Al-Nasafi. And the significance of this is that this book particularly, which actually led to put Mohamed Abdul immediately in conflict with the establishment with Al-Azhar, is that it actually expresses the Mu'tazilites, the views of the Mu'tazili, and essentially the views of the Mu'tazili, at the heart of the views of the Mu'tazili are two factors: reason, and using reason in religious explanations, and second aspect is social justice. From this is the beginning really. So the outcome of this whole process led to a subversive reading of the Quran and the Hadith. I did a survey of all the speeches of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, of all the speeches of the Secretary General of Hezbollah in Lebanon, of Khalid Mashal, the leader of Hamas in Palestine, and the Ramadan Abdullah, the leader of the Islamic Jihad in Palestine. And these are the same, they are using the same, almost repeating the same Quranic verses over and over and over again. They don't reject, actually, seem to reject from these verses the reducing Islam to ethical standards and food and dress codes. They don't even talk about dress codes or food codes or anything. They just talk about essentially the basic idea of resistance, resisting oppression of all sorts, but particularly resisting imperialist oppression. I'm not going to read all the verses, but Quran 3:173, 4:104, 3:160, 47:7, 8:17, and of course also the hadith, the sayings of Prophet Mohammed, and some other Islamic leaders. One of the most interesting that I found was that Hezbollah, particularly leaders, repeat many times, is said by Imam Ali, the cousin of Prophet Muhammad and the fourth caliph. He says simply that true death is in living defeated and oppressed. True life is in dying triumphant. So he's essentially calling for resistance. Another aspect of this reimagining of Islam as a revolutionary view or as a revolutionary theory is a subversive rewriting of Arab history. The example that I use here essentially is the rediscovery of Karbala. The rediscovery of Karbala as one of the most significant events in Islamic history, at the value of Imam Hussein. This rewriting of this particular event in history tells three significant things. First, revolutionary rewriting of Islamic history, or revolutionary reconstruction of Islamic history by using Karbala as the ultimate event, the ultimate confrontation between the oppressed and the oppressor, and redefining the main figure of the event, Imam Hussein, and from being essentially in traditional religious thoughts, from being a figure like Jesus Christ, a saint essentially, into becoming something like Che Guevara in modern reading of Karbala. The best source for this really revolutionary reading is Sayyid Mohamed of Lebanon, who has a book on this, and it's a very interesting read. So it's through this reimagining of Islam, reconstruction of Islam, we have a new history, we have a new Islam, we have a new Quran, we have a new Hadith. And one of the most important or significant implications or application of this rewriting of history was during the war on Gaza, when Sayyid Nasrallah addressed the people of Gaza using the same statement that Imam Hussein said before he was killed in Karbala. So Karbala became like a floating signifier. It can be every day is Ashura, they say, which is the day that event took place, and every land is Karbala. So Gaza was Karbala during the Israeli massacre in Gaza in 2009. There is so much to say about Karbala. I'm going to skip on this. But there are many characterizations of this new brand of Islam, this brand discourse that I call revolutionary Islam. Malik bin Nabi, who is one of the most important philosophers, I think, that contributed, an Algerian Islamic philosopher who contributed to this discourse, characterizes Islam as a vehicle of political, social, cultural, and intellectual liberation. Abu Hamid Misiri, an Egyptian scholar, characterizes Islam as a worldview. And if we characterize Islam as a worldview, then Islam can provide the basis or the principles of a grand narrative. Gregorian characterizes Islam as a liberation politics. I agree with the first two, I disagree with the third, because I don't think comparing Islam to liberation theology is valid, since, and the example that Sayyid Nasrallah used the Quran and not Mao Zedong, so he didn't feel the need for using something else, makes Islam and Islamic politics in this case, and liberation theology in Latin America. This is the basics of theory. I know the basics of the theory of revolution in Islam and theory of imperialism. This is from Ali Sharia, the Arabian Islamic scholar. who says that the greatest human value is the one from which he began, which is rejection, refusing to submit, and what might be summarized in the word no, from which Adam became human. He was ordered to not eat from that fruit, but he did, and thus he became Adam. So the origin of being human and being Adam in this perception is to say no and to rejection. I think this is one of the most important principles of the Islamic revolution. Malik bin Nabi, another one. Okay, this is a poem. Actually, I just wanted to insert it because this account of Satan and the account of Adam are very interesting. The way they are subversively rewritten. An interesting and famous Egyptian poet says, not from an Islamic background though, praise be to Satan, rewriting this account. The Lord of the Wind, he who said no, saying no, refusing to kneel before Adam, said no against those who said yes. Malik bin Nabi talks about the idea of susceptibility to colonization, essentially a social psychological condition that is produced by a combination of domestic conditions and colonization, local and external. And he talks about the colonization of the mind, and he sees Islam as a tool to liberate the Islamic culture and the Arab culture and politics and economics from this condition. Actually, he traces this back to the fall of the Mohamed state or Almohad states in Spain in 1250, and the fall of Baghdad in 1256. And he is the one, I think, who provides the most coherent theory of revolution and of imperialism. He provides a view of the West that is very unique and very interesting, unlike most of the perceptions that people have about Islamic perceptions of the West. And he perceives imperialism as being a total reality and criticizes the psychology, Western psychology or epistemological imperialism, essentially, as manifested in some psychological studies and their applications on the people of the Middle East. So this is they provide a comprehensive perception of what imperialism is. It's not really a military force, it's not really an economic force, it's not really a political force or cultural force, it's all of these. And they're focused on the epistemological critique of Western knowledge and Western perception is central to the reconstitution of the self, the Muslim self, and the rise of the new Muslim, and the rise of the new Arab, who are the rebels of these days. So this is part of the ammunition that was provided for the young people of these days. But another important figure in this, just one of you, not many of us gonna be done. On imperialism, he says, if you pay no attention to their politics, of the imperialists, and consider religion to be simply the few topics that you're always studying and never go beyond them, then the imperialists will leave you alone. Play as much as you like. It's your oil that they're after. And he talks about another kind of Islam, that actually the good Islam from the imperialist perception. And another definition of Islam, the last thing, is that Islam is the religion of those who desire freedom and independence. It's the school of those who struggle against imperialism. But the servants of imperialism have presented another kind of Islam. The Islam that is currently at the center of the counter-revolution in Egypt, in Tunisia, some of the great names, supposedly, figures that are being used today to signify or to represent the Islamic view on the revolution are really at the heart of the counter-revolutionary forces. So we didn't get to the explanations, but I will stop here and if anybody has a question, we'll answer. Thank you.
factors that have led to this revolution. My paper is by all means just only a micro representation of the macro explanation of what really happened in Egypt and what has been happening in Egypt for the last 2 years. The Egyptian revolution took place in 2011. The ex-president Mubarak came to power in 1981. According to Middle Eastern scholars and political scientists, Mubarak, in the first 10 years, from 1980 to 1990, he has been acting as if he was working for the common good, the common interest of Egypt. But starting from 1990 until the last day of his leadership of Egypt, he had been described as someone who has been working for his own self-interest and then finally for his son's interest. So in this paper, I'm talking about the most important political reasons, but at the same time also we have to understand that there are other important non-political factors, such as the economic factors, such as the social factors, such as also the technology factor or the internet or the digital information technology factor, in addition also to a number of regional factors, particularly the success of the Tunisian revolution in 2010. In addition to that, also other external factors such as the United States' desire to see changes happening in Egypt. You would have, for example, imagine a complete different scenario for the course of the Egyptian revolution if the United States continued to support President Mubarak, if the Tunisian revolution, for example, has never taken place, if, for example, the Egyptian young man who has been beaten to death by the Egyptian security forces in Alexandria, who is Khalid Said, has never been murdered by the Egyptian security forces, or what we call in Arabic, Qawat al-Markazi. In addition to that, also we could imagine, for example, what would have happened to the Egyptian revolution if the Egyptian army had never sided with the Egyptian society against Mubarak. On the top of that, there is also a huge role for someone that nobody probably has talked about, and this is Dr. Mohamed. He actually was the first one to start the process of revolting or civil disobedience against Mubarak. He has been talking about what happened in Egypt in 2011, about a year ago. So he's the one who started the whole process, and then eventually what happened, we'll start seeing other forces coming to bear on. So in this paper, I'll be talking particularly about the absence of democracy as one of the most important political factors that led to the Egyptian revolution. I'm going to talk also about the so-called emergency laws, which Mubarak has used since 1981 until the last minute of his rule in order to tighten his fist hand over the Egyptians for almost nearly 31 years. In addition to that, also I'll be talking about the election, the fraud elections as well, in addition also to some other factors. So as I'm saying here, that this paper seeks to underline the most critical domestic and regional political factors that have triggered the 2011 Egyptian revolution. Now, I'm just proposing a number of questions here. One of the questions was it the state of political and physical oppression that have sent some of Egyptians of Egypt human and political rights activists to prisons and claimed the life of many others, or was it the notorious emergency laws that Mubarak has used since his ascendancy to political power in 1981 to confiscate the Egyptians' freedom and constitutional rights? Here, of course, we have a picture. This is probably was one of the scenes, one of the most common scenes that we have seen during the Egyptian revolution, a confrontation between one of the most important links or one of the most important arms or muscle that the state has used in defending its autocratic group over the Egyptian security forces facing the Egyptians in one of the ministries in Cairo. Then I moved on here to move on to the next question, or was it the brutal murder of Khalid Mohamed Said in Alexandria on June 6, 2010? My Mubarak security forces that ignitioned the 2000 Egyptian revolution? Or was it the astounding success of the 2010 Tunisian revolution in overthrowing economy? In fact, it was all of these different factors combined. And by all means, these are not the only factors. We have other factors, of course, that I have left out for future papers. Now, in this paper's view, it was a combination of all of these domestic and regional factors. Still, as I'm saying, there are some other important economic factors that have led to this revolution. Now, one of these factors is this picture, actually. Okay, what is written in this picture, it's written in Arabic, but of course the translation is they are describing the Egyptian government as a very dancing Egyptian government. And then it says that we are even borrowing money in order to buy our bread. And of course, buying a loaf of bread is very cheap in Egypt. You can buy a loaf of bread for almost 1 cent or 2 cents. So this describes the deep state of economic poverty that has shaken the foundations of the Egyptian society. Mubarak has made a big mistake that has basically angered the vast majority of the Egyptians. More than 50% of the Egyptians are living on less than $2 a day, which means basically that they are living on this poverty line. If Mubarak's government has never given up on those, this would have made a big difference in terms of the success of the Egyptian revolution. So actually it was even Mubarak, you could even consider Mubarak himself and his failure in responding to the basic economic needs of the Egyptian society as one of the reasons that has led eventually to the rise of this revolution. So Mubarak actually was participating in this revolution indirectly. Here what I would like to show you is one of my diagrams in my paper, my actual paper, on page 5. This is figure 1, and figure 1 here summarizes the basic political factors. You can see the absence of democracy and the state with the stagnation of the rule of law, the state's political oppression, plus internal security execution of Egyptian subjects. And here I use the term or the title subject or the word subject because Egyptians have never been treated as citizens, at least in the eyes of Mubarak. Okay, and this is of course also one of the objectives that has motivated the Egyptians eventually to try to get out of this state of subjecthood to the state of citizenhood, and which of course they are still working on. Now, all of these factors together, this will be like the Egyptian revolution formula. Okay, so all of these factors combined will give us two sounds of the Egyptian revolution. Now, one of the other interesting questions is why did the Egyptian revolt? Figure 2 actually summarizes some of the general objectives that the Egyptians want to achieve from overthrowing Mubarak. The first objective is the establishment of a free and vibrant democracy. Now, the question is what type of free and vibrant democracy? Is it going to be the American model of democracy, or is it going to be an Islamic model of democracy, which has not been invented yet? Okay, it doesn't have to be the Turkish model of democracy. It might be something that might be a different Islamic model of democracy. This remains to be seen. However, at this point, they are calling for the establishment of a free and vibrant democracy. The second objective is that the institution of the rule of law. Corruption in Egypt has been widely spread, especially in the last 20 years. Just to cite only one example, a powerful Egyptian businessman has managed to obtain more than $100 million from one of the main public sector banks. Public sector banks are banks that are owned by the Egyptian government. And he did not pay $100 million, and he managed actually to flee the country and run away with the $100 million. So the spread of economic corruption was one of the reasons also that has led to this revolution as well. So therefore, one of the objectives is to institute the rule of law in order to prevent and eventually eliminate the state of corruption in Egypt. In addition to this objective also, the state recognition and respect of the Egyptian human and political freedoms and rights. Also, solving Egypt's long-standing economic problems and improving the Egyptian living standards, all of these are the general objectives that the Egyptians are trying to achieve. If I'm going to summarize these objectives, I can summarize them basically in 3 objectives. We're talking about freedom, democracy, and economic prosperity, in addition to human dignity. Dignity is one of the missing actually elements that the Egyptian has been looking for. Now, going back again to my paper. So now I move on now to the next point. The standstill state of deep poverty in Egypt that has forced 50% of Egypt, 80 million, to live on less than $2 a day, combined with the rising rates of unemployment, have also driven Egyptians to revolt against Mubarak's autocratic regime. In addition, the widespread of corruption within the state institutions, and the ruling political party, this is of course the National Democratic Party, has certainly played a positive role in motivating the Egyptians to break away from Mubarak's autocratic rule. Now this is another scene here, of course, that you can see. This is taken from Midan al-Tahrir, or Celebration Square. Egyptians are basically demonstrating against Mubarak's regime. Now, among the different political factors, I'm going to talk about each one of them very briefly. Among the different political factors that have led to this revolution are the following. First, absence of internal democracy, as we said, dramatic increase of the state oppression, and throughout the nearly 31 years of Mubarak's autocratic rule, Egypt had never had fair and free democratic elections. So here, in my paper, what I've done, I have used the elections as a measurement to assess the level of democracy in Egypt. Did Egypt have a free and fair parliamentary and presidential election throughout Mubarak's years? The answer is no for almost all political scientists and also foreign observers and local observers as well. Now here we have some other pictures taken also from the actual scene of the Egyptian revolution. This was referred to in the Egyptian political literature as a camel battle, when some of Mubarak's supporters started sending their supporters from a tiny village outside Cairo, from Giza, that's where the pyramids are, to try to intimidate the Egyptian youth and elderly as well at Midan al-Tahrir, and of course we are seeing here a confrontation. Now another also here scene is showing us a dominant sector of the Egyptian society. This is a working class, and they are basically calling for the overthrowing of Mubarak. Now, going back again to my discussion of the elections, in fact, many observers have argued that all the elections that were held in Mubarak's Egypt were a state-run political show. These elections were designed to post an image of Mubarak, his son Kemal, in addition also to, as well, the members of his Democratic Party. Now, I'm going to just read to you just a very simple 2 lines from one of the quotations that Dr. Csicsmann has given me in Egypt through one of my personal meetings with him. He was describing that behavior, the autocratic behavior of the Egyptian government toward the desire of the Egyptian, some of the Egyptian pro-society to vote for the Muslim Brotherhood. He said that from his point of view, the Muslim Brother candidates would run in these elections as independent. Why? Because what happened here that all these Muslim Brother candidates who have announced their candidacy for running for the public office that was acting for the Egyptian parliament have been called to the police stations and they have been threatened not to run or else or otherwise they will face the consequences. Right. Now here I'm talking about the emergency laws. Mubarak's regime also has been notorious for using the emergency laws and intimidating Egypt's political parties, independents, and voters from participating in this in the election process in general. For example, during the 2001 elections, Egypt Ministry of Interior had arrested as many as 64 of the Muslim Brothers supporters, and it charged them with threatening the country's national interest. This has been actually a standard accusation or a standard crime that the Egyptian security organizations. Of course, in Egypt, when we talk about security organizations, we're talking about the Egyptian Ministry of Interior, which is probably equivalent to our Homeland Security over here in the United States, in addition also to the state intelligence as well. So, they have been accusing whoever is running against Mubarak or whoever basically has a political point of view that runs against the main stream, that's Mubarak's view, as of threatening the country's national interest. Moreover, in 2005, for example, Mubarak's autocratic regime ordered the arrest of Ayman Noor. Mr. Ayman Noor, of course, who was the only Egyptian who had the guts to stand up to Mubarak in 2005 presidential election and run against him. Now, basically to intimidate Ayman Noor from redoing it again, and everybody else in Egypt from challenging and standing up to Mubarak, he has been arrested actually. Okay, so he has been arrested for designing the former sovereign, that's Mubarak, and running against him during that year's presidential elections. It was not until 2009 when Mubarak's regime finally released Ayman Noor at the precondition that the United States has put before the Egyptian president back then could visit the White House. Now, as of today, of course, it is still too early. Now, I'm going to just jump to the conclusions. Conclusions are very important. As we stand today, it is very early to classify the 2011 Egyptian revolution as a journey of an absolute political success. We cannot call the Egyptian revolution yet a political success. Why? For different reasons. Okay, but the most important reason is what I'm saying here: the late announcement of Mubarak ex-vice president Omar Suleiman. That's his vice president who has been working under his leadership as his private messenger, carrying messages and delivering messages to Mubarak's friends and allies around the world. He announced his presidency, his intention for, and his actually plan for running for the presidency of Egypt. Not only Omar Suleiman. In addition to Omar Suleiman, also we have the ex-prime minister, the last prime minister under Mubarak's role, that's Mr. Ahmed Shafiq, for running for the Egyptian presidency as well. The future of democracy in this country seems to be on the brink of collapse for this reason and for other reasons. Besides, we have other factors such as the widening political and religious gap between Egypt moderates. And Egypt moderates include all the members of the Muslim groups, especially the Egyptian Christians or the Egyptian Copts. In addition, also to moderate Muslims who are basically calling for the establishment of a secular state. Now, how do Egyptians define secularism to answer the question that Professor John raised this morning? Secularism is defined in general terms as a matter of separating church and state. In Egypt, it's a matter of separation of the mosque and the state or religion of the state, which means basically that religion or Islam, in the case of Egypt, is not going to have any role to play in governing the public space. It's going to only have a role to play in the private space. So the public space is left to be ruled by the state's rules, which basically most likely are going to be, of course, secularist. This is a definition of secularism, and that's why those Egyptians are calling for the establishment of a Dawla Madaniya. The translation of a Dawla Madaniya basically is quote-unquote a civil state. Another translation is a secularist state that is not based on what God says and what Prophet Mohammed says. Instead, it is said on what the national interest of the people or the private interest of the people. Or it is even based on the general will, going back to Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Jean Locke, right? So here, back to the factors, the different factors that have led that are basically making it difficult and going to make it difficult for the future of democracy in Egypt and the future of the Egyptian revolution in Egypt is also the fact that the Muslim Brotherhood are divided within each other. So they are not acting as one united front or frontier. So within the Muslim Brotherhood, you're going to find those who are calling for the full implementation of Islam, others who are calling for halfway between Islam and secularism. On the top of these political division that we are seeing right now in Egypt, also we have to consider the economic hardship. The economic hardship that Egypt right now is facing, which has pressured the Egyptian government to go out and seek financial assistance from the Gulf states and from the IMF. Now, this is going to take me to the last question here. Only time will tell whether the 2012 Egyptians will continue the revolution until all their objectives are achieved, or basically they will resign with overthrowing the head of Egypt's democratic regime and a few, of course, and a few of its key members. I have only one minute to elaborate on the role of the United States. It is very important, of course, to notice what the United States is going to, or how the United States is going to react if we have a candidate from the Muslim Brotherhood that is going to become the next president of Egypt. What about the United States' reaction toward even what's happening right now after Omar Suleiman has announced his presidential election. From my point of view, I believe that the future of the Egyptian revolution now is in danger, because it is not only the domestic forces that are going to shape the future of this revolution, but we have also other key players in the Middle East, like, for example, Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries, in addition also to the United States and the European Union. So for now, we will have to just basically remain, we have to basically observe what's happening in Egypt and remain hopeful that eventually the Egyptian revolution will succeed. All right. Thank you very much.
Turkey, as one of the strongest regional powers and growing global power, is increasing the effect of the Middle Eastern politics since the Erdogan government came to the rule. Interestingly, Erdogan's government has achieved bringing right-wing votes together and has returned to the power 3 times by improving his party's vote margin in each election. And also, it is clear that he is answering the needs and the desires of the Turkish middle class, since most of the votes come from them, and media has an important effect on them. The influence of the middle class on the Erdogan's internal politics is undeniable. It also made an influence on his foreign politics, as it can be seen in Marmara incident, Palestine-Israel conflict, and Armenia question. The government, in almost all these issues, has to consider public opinion sensibility. Similar to the previous incidents, recently the international community witnessed a supreme war around Arab lands, which have traditionally had a strong relationship with Turkish internal and foreign affairs. I believe that the way of the Turkish media's transmitting of the news about Arab Spring is significant if you want to understand properly Turkish response to it. Therefore, in my research, I chose 5 major Turkish newspapers and analyzed how they interpret the revolutions, as well as presented them to Turkish opinion. Those newspapers are Zaman, Posta, Hürriyet, Sabah, and Habertürk. And they constitute nearly half of the entire daily circulation. This means that their role in Turkish understanding of Arab Spring is highly effective. My research is focused on the months between April to August 2011, and it covers around 500 news and articles. This time period is significant because it also coincides with Turkish general elections, which were highly bruising race took place between parties as well as publications and media. So much so that the Prime Minister, as well as many columnists, accused each other of taking sides and reporting biased information. This complex process also shows its influence on the Turkish foreign policy. Before passing to my discussion, it is important to note that we can see so many different approaches to Arab Spring in Turkish newspapers, which can be traced from very radical to very reformist views. This very freedom of thought and press in Turkish context can easily be understood, and my research scope covers 5 major of them. Although Hürriyet and Posta are known for their harsh criticism toward the government, Zaman and Sabah are generally regarded as supportive for the government in politics. However, peace between these two different and sometimes opposite trends. I analyzed firstly Hürriyet and Posta by focusing on their presentation of incidents in the Arab lands. Afterwards, I passed to more governmental supported newspapers and discussed their attitude toward the Arab Spring. Now, if you look, they are presenting the Arab Spring. For Hürriyet and Posta, the motivation behind Arab Spring is Western power. Instead of these internal powers, these Western powers, and the people of the Arab countries are always wanting to be free, and because they didn't have the power of it, the Western power get the rulers down. This is what Hürriyet and Posta mostly present the Arab Spring to Israel, their leaders. And for Hürriyet and Posta, is Turkey the model country for the Arab people? Their answer generally presenting of the news, yes and no. Since Turkey has a very big problem inside, such as Kurdish issue and freedom of thought, it cannot be a good model for the Arab people. And economy, is Turkey affected by the Arab Spring in a good way? For the Hürriyet and Posta, it is no, because Turkey's good relationship with the rulers badly affected by the Arab Spring, and it cannot be in a good way in the future. And one of the headlines about it, about especially the Kurdish issue, on April 22nd, is that Turkish Kurds are standing for their rights. Means that Turkey has a very bad relationship with this minority, and how can it be a model for the Arabs? Another headline, another thing from Feria Tunç, the columnist of Hürriyet. He says that Arab Spring showed the link between democracy and freedom of thought, and Turkey is very low in these issues. And Posta has a headline which is very striking. It says Turkey is in the middle of the clash. If I pass to Sabah, for Sabah, the motivation behind the Arab Spring is Turkish government, especially Erdogan. And can Turkey be a model for the Arabs? The answer is yes. And how economy affected by the Arab Spring is positive. And Sabah's special stress is on Erdogan's role. And one of the titles of the article written by Yahya Bosran on June 17 is that democracy expedition for Erdogan's visit to Arab lands. They see it, Erdogan is the man of democracy, and it takes it to Arab lands. For the Zaman, the motivation behind the Arab Spring is unclear. There are so many reasons, so many factors play at the same time, internal and external factors. And for Zaman, can Turkey be a model country for the Arabs? The answer is yes. And economy, Zaman generally draws a negative and positive in terms of economical development affected by Arab Spring. And special stress of Zaman about Arab Spring is democracy. And one of the titles of the articles written by Kemal Balcı, he said the flower of Arab Spring is in the Turkey. And another title is that Turkey is the most popular country for the Arabs. This is how Zaman draws the picture. For the other two, similar to Zaman, same time, Turkey can be a good model for the Arabs, and economy affected positively. And Haberturk's stress is on Turkish leadership in the Arab lands. And however, when the Arab Spring came to Syria, one of the titles of the articles written by Kemal Pehlivanoglu, Turkey sucked, because Arab Springs came so close to them and they don't know how to solve it. So Turkey has to work on it. All in all, if I put aside a few marginal, self-critical and contradictory thoughts and the news in each newspaper I researched, I can say that they differ from each other generally on these main points. Oslo and Hürriyet's interpretation and transmitting of the Arab Spring can be summarized as a process which distorts the government's foreign policy and weakens its successful role. The general tendency is that the Western global powers control everything in the Arab world and they get whatever they want. According to Sabah, Turkey's growing economic power and its stability led this to be an effective country in the region and a model country for the whole Muslim world in a general and Arabs especially. The concept of neo-Ottomanism takes a significant place in Sabah's transmitting of news. According to Haberturk, even though Turkey had a growing and successful influence on its neighbors and in the region, and even though it had positive politics toward Arab Springs, the issue of Syria puts Turkey in a very dangerous place where it cannot easily resolve the problem without resulting damage. According to Zaman, even though there are so many motivations and forces behind Arab Spring, democracy will be the greatest value to come from it. And Turkey's growing, developing democracy can be a model for Arabs. Therefore, Turkey should continue its democratic process, which it has been intensely doing since the last decade. It is important to note that it is not so difficult to state that after the general election on June 12, 2011, which resulted in a great success for Erdogan's AKP, Hürriyet and Postal have slightly changed their negative attitudes to positive toward the conservative government. The other newspapers agree that the government's success in the election will strengthen its hand when dealing with foreign politics, such as Arab Spring issues and EU membership as well. These newspapers' expectations escalated with the new constitution process after the elections. All in all, in my research, I questioned the role of newspapers in transmitting the Arab Spring to Turkish people. By doing this, I assume that there is freedom of thought, which provides us three possible outcomes that will be helpful and will contribute to the fields of intercultural, interreligious dialogue, and international relations. The first result is that the more there is freedom of thought, the more there is place for intercultural dialogue. If the findings show that there are opposite and different opinions expressed freely, then this assumption produces strength. Second, freedom of thought is an essential dynamic for Turkey to keep its stability and development in all areas from economics to religion. The richness of different ideas and understandings is one of the greatest values to a state. By examining newspapers' different approaches in the context of Arab Spring, I showed how the freedom and richness of expression is one of the core values of Turkey. Third, the perception of newspapers and transmitting information about Arab Spring to Turkish public draws us a clear picture about Turkish interaction with Arab world, which is dramatically increasing in the recent decade. These newspapers' different interpretation of the Arab Spring create different kinds of perceptions in Turkish people's mind. Without knowing such a significant point, it would be impossible to understand Turkish reaction to Arab Spring. Thus, I hope the work contributes to a better understanding by showing how Turkish people are being informed about the incidents outside of Turkey. Thank you.
I am very grateful to the panelists for not pointing out the fundamental contradiction that is involved in this panel. That is, we've been talking about the dynamics of overthrow of authoritarian rule, and yet they have accepted the Mubarak-like authoritarian rule of the moderator for the last hour and a half. Thank you for not, shall we say, moving into the occupied and revolutionary mode. And of course, I would have put up with if one of them would have been happily doing a rap refutation of my 5-minute thing. We do have a little bit of time for some questions, and what I would suggest is that we again work in the same way that we did before in the other two panels of taking maybe 3 questions and seeing, and then giving people a chance to respond. Okay. So there's one over there. There's a question. Well, let Striped T-shirt do it first. Ahmed gets a chance to talk in.
Well, thank you. So for the first speaker, if what is described as an Islamist party wins, is that such a bad thing? And then the second question for whoever wants to answer it. In your opinion, should democracy come first, or should the people's wishes come first? So basically self-determination. Should they be allowed to or not?
Okay, and then next, right just down the road there, right?
Thank you very much. I learned a lot from the panel. I really appreciate it. I guess my question goes back to Seif. So please help me understand the whole issue of the argument. At least in my understanding, and taking Professor Qureishi's class in Islam and politics, so at least the early Islamic scholars tried not to really engage into the politics and try to stick in their own role. And in my understanding, according to my experience during the revolution, it was a big discussion between Khomeini and Mutahari. Mutahari was saying to the Khomeini that you have to come back to Qom and you have to start your teaching and do not dwell upon of taking any power or run the state, basically. And Khomeini said, no, this is, I want to do this because the country needs me. And they went into back and forth, and then eventually Mutahari went into the house arrest. So the question is, which one uses the other one most? Does the politicians and politics uses Islam to influence the, run whatever they want to do, or does the Islam uses politics? I don't know. I think I just got confused in this round.
Okay, and then let's do maybe 4 questions in the sense that Ahmed, and let's do real questions.
Sure. For Professor Darda, when we look at the recent events, is this really fair to depict as the Islamic revolution as if against the West, especially given Syria? How come Hezbollah is providing support to Assad regime? Because if Kerbala is so important, I think today Humus is Kerbala, Damascus is Kerbala. Why does Hezbollah support Assad regime?
Okay. Let's go with that. If we can get short answers, we've got a couple more questions. So
Thanks, thank you for the questions. Not easy. Yes, it's working. Thanks for the questions. I think it's not easy to answer. The first question was about Islamist parties as that things. I don't want to describe them as that things. Just I try to describe the transformation toward democratic values. And in the case of Egypt, for example, I'm very pessimistic about the democratization, like the previous speaker said, not because of the Islamist parties, but other factors as well. The main problem with the Freedom and Justice Party that the leadership comes from very conservative, not the young generation involved in the movement, and I mean that they socialized during the Sadat and Nasser era, and they haven't. They experienced a very different political system, and that's why maybe the Egyptian model then is not a democracy but a new kind of authoritarian system, not because of Islamist parties themselves. The second question was about Khomeini Ayatollah and the role of Islam. Islam uses politics or politics uses Islam. And just I would like to recall the discussion within Iraq after ousting the dictator Saddam Hussein, when Ayatollah Sistani asked the same question about the role of Islam in the future of Iraq, and he said he distanced himself from Khomeini's approach and said that Islam should not, or Ayatollahs should not participate in politics like in the Iranian model. So it is not easy to answer the question. Maybe both. Islam uses politics as politics uses Islam, as far I can say.
Thank you. I'm really interested in explaining the statements of Islamic leaders and Islamic scholars in terms of by emphasizing the historical context that informs these statements. Basically, what my main argument was that Arabs or Muslims generally, Muslim scholars and Muslim leaders, have constantly reimagined and reimagined Islam based on the given historical context. And when the significance of the contribution of Jamaluddin Elowny was that he constructed Islam or reconstructed Islam in the context of the anti-colonial and anti-imperial struggle at the beginning in the 19th century. And that informed most of the statements and most of his explanation and interpretations of Islam. That's why Mohamed Abdul was fascinated by the new interpretations that Elowny brought. That's really the way I was trying to read these statements made by these leaders, by considering mainly the historical context that informed these statements. Now, does Islam influence politics, or is used by politics, or uses politics? Which influences which? I think there is some sort of a dialectical interconnection between the two. My own personal view, and as a sociologist, I think everything is political and everything is ideological. Religion can never be apolitical. Even those who reduce Islam to ethical standards and food codes and dress codes are actually promoting an ideology and promoting a certain political platform. So it's exactly like neoliberalism today. I just hate to keep repeating the idea of neoliberalism, but the ideas of neoliberalism are being promoted as being ideology-free, but they are not really ideology-free or politics-free. There are certain perceptions and concepts and phrases that are promoted today, like really the ideas of democracy and freedom. What is democracy and what is freedom? The global powers and the regional powers are promoting certain kinds of freedom and certain models for democracies that serves the interests of the West and the imperialist interests, basically. And even with that kind of freedom, that simply means individual freedom that is disconnected from any economic structure and as if neoliberalism really does not reconfigure as the economic structure of each country. So surrendering the country, the Middle East countries, or our countries in particular, to the dictations of the World Bank and the IMF and the US aid to, and transforming and supporting NGOs that are promoting ideas that it's individual freedom and it's not part of a collective problem. It's not a reflection of a general problem. It's part of this issue. So there are two kinds of freedom that are being promoted, and there's a struggle over what freedom is really, and there's a struggle over what democracy is. Like in Egypt, do we need to write the constitution before the election of the president's election or after? Each has a meaning. Do we need to borrow from the World Bank again, or do we need to boycott our relations with the World Bank? Some people think that most of the troubles of all the world, really, even in the US, come from this international political economic model that has been promoted and is excessively destructive to the extent that in Egypt, less people can read now after the privatization campaign of 1997 by Mubarak than they used to in 2006. Now, that's my take on the issue. I don't see anything to able to stop and move on. Okay. The question on Syria, it's really how we understand. I don't think that Hezbollah is against the revolution and against reform in Syria, and I think it was a major force underlying most of the revolts in the Arab world. On Syria, particularly, what they emphasize, because they have a perception, they simply say that every domestic event is by implication a regional event. And the regional order has a primacy in their political way of thinking. And in the case of Syria, they believe, maybe they're wrong, maybe they're right, simply that the replacement of Assad will be Elowny and his company. And they are essentially going to promote exactly the same old politics, neoliberal politics, and accepting for the only difference between them and the existing regime will be supporting resistance, Arab resistance against Israel. So in terms of Hezbollah's perception, they think the regime needs to be reformed, and the opposition is not as good really as the regime, because they gave up the only thing that is good about the regime from their point of view, which is resisting Israel.
Why don't we have Mohamed, if the last two of you would just like to wrap up. I think we are at our time, and I do want to follow also the precedents of the preceding moderators, which meant that they ended almost on time, and I want us to end almost on time with a little bit of extra time because we had some sound difficulties. But why don't the last two of you do some wrap-up statements?
Sure. I just have a comment with regard to the first question that the gentleman back there raised up. Your question is, I recall, should democracy come first or Islam? I mean, this is a big question, and how we're going to know the answer. This, of course, is going to depend on the perception of the key major players in the Arab political space. Who's going to win the election? Whoever is going to win the election, and whoever is going to manage to solve also most of that economic problem, especially in a country like Egypt, and a country like Libya, for example, whoever is going to manage to bring all of these tribes together and succeed eventually in forming the new 21st century modern state, definitely will have a say in saying how much power Islam have over the public space. However, I can assure you that I don't think that you're going to see the type of conservative Islamic model that you saw, for example, in Iran. Most likely it's going to be probably more closer, as many speakers have suggested today, to the Turkish model. And why that? Because it is in the best self-interest of the society, of the region, and at the same time also because of the foreign forces pressure as well. Many have argued that we are not in the 7th century AD, 10th century AD, reinvent or reinstitute, I should say, the traditional or orthodox Islamic model, including even some scholars like Dr. Cetinkaya, for example, who has suggested that Islam, or being a Muslim or living in an Islamic society, does not mean necessarily that you have to apply every letter and every word of the Holy Quran or the Prophet Sunnah. So that's the first comment, and there's a second comment that lady over there raised two divisions use Islam. In the case of the Middle East, at least in modern East sense, the rise of the so-called military revolutionary regimes, definitely Islam has been used as a cover-up for all different types of mistakes that Arab leaders have made. Hypocrisy in the Middle East is different from hypocrisy elsewhere, like in Latin America, for example. It does have a religious base. It did have a religious mouse and religious front. And Mubarak until the last days of his leadership. You had the mosque standing behind him, and you had the highest religious leaders, as well as authorities in Egypt, praising him. So, well, now, if you're going to look at the use from, if you're going to treat it as a negative term, definitely, yes, politicians have used Islam. If you're going to look at it from, as a positive term, Islam will make the use of politics in order to bring its soul back to the public life as well. So yes, Islam will take an advantage of what's happening today in the Middle East in order to expand the scope of its control. I shouldn't say its control because it's very controversial, but at least its presence in the public space. Thank you.
Kenan?
I want to answer to my friend's question. I think there are so many values, such as democracy and freedom of thought and liberty, and in order to find a reasonable solution for the welfare of the people, I think we should get the value of dialogue also. If people do not have a very good link to understand each other, I think it is impossible to reach democracy and other values in a proper sense.
Before we express our appreciation to the panelists, I want to ask Mustafa to remind us again of what comes next.
Next we have a break, and now we have a break until 7 o'clock, when we have a reception, and our next keynote speaker, Seif will be speaking during the reception at 7. The reception is here, same room.
Okay, well, let us all thank our panels for